In 1866, a Texas rancher named Charles Goodnight bolted a wooden pantry box onto the back of a surplus army wagon. That invention, the chuck wagon, changed everything about how cowboys ate on the open range. But Hollywood never showed you the real meals. Number 18 used an ingredient so bizarre that trail cooks gave it a name too vulgar to print. And number 3 involved a chemical reaction between campfire ash and cornmeal that modern food scientists say unlocks nutrients the human body cannot access any other way. These 25 meals kept 250,000 cowboys alive across 1,500 miles of brutal terrain from South Texas to the railheads of Kansas. No refrigeration, no resupply, just fire, dust, and ingenuity. Before we start, hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 most forgotten meals from the American cattle trail. Number 25, hardtack soaked in bacon grease. Before anything fancy turned up in the chuck wagon, cowboys carried hardtack. Those dense, square crackers were baked from flour and water and nothing else. They dated back to the Civil War, when soldiers called them sheet iron and worm castles. A single cracker could survive months in a saddlebag without spoiling. The problem was eating it. Hardtack was so hard it could chip a tooth. Cowboys soaked it in hot bacon grease or crumbled it into coffee until it softened into something chewable. Some cooks fried the soaked pieces until the edges crisped, turning watery bean soup into a meal with texture. A barrel cost about $2 and fed a crew for weeks. It tasted like nothing. That was the point. Pure survival fuel for men 80 miles from the nearest town. Number 24, cowboy beans. Pinto beans were the backbone of every cattle drive. Dried pintos traveled light, lasted forever, and delivered protein that kept a man upright through 16-hour days in the saddle. The cook soaked them overnight, then simmered them for hours in a cast-iron Dutch oven buried in coals. Salt pork or bacon ends went in for flavor. Wild onions if he had foraged any. A handful of chili peppers if the outfit ran a South Texas crew. By evening, the beans turned into a thick, smoky paste that clung to a tin plate and stayed in your belly through the long night watch. A 50-pound sack cost around $4 in the 1870s and stretched across an entire drive. Cowboys ate beans at breakfast, beans at supper, beans cold from the pot at midnight when they came off watch. The men complained about the consequences loudly and never once turned down a second helping. Number 23, beef jerky. Long before gas station bags and teriyaki glaze, jerky was the original trail food. Cowboys cut lean beef into thin strips, rubbed them with salt, and hung them over low smoke or draped them across wagon frames to dry in the sun. The process pulled out nearly all the moisture, creating a product that weighed almost nothing and lasted for months. Trail jerky was nothing like what you buy today. It was drier, more brittle, and so salty it could make your lips crack. Cowboys chewed it like tobacco, working a strip for 20 minutes just to soften it enough to swallow. The smart ones crumbled jerky into stews or soaked strips in water to rehydrate the meat. Native peoples had perfected this technique for centuries before cowboys adopted it. A week's worth of protein fit in a coat pocket. No fire needed, no preparation required. Number 22, sourdough biscuits. The sourdough starter was the most valuable thing in the chuck wagon. A good starter was a living culture of wild yeast, kept alive in a clay crock, fed with flour and water, and sometimes carried for years from one drive to the next. Every morning before dawn, the cook mixed starter with flour, salt, and lard, then baked biscuits in a Dutch oven with coals heaped on the lid. They came out steaming, golden, and heavy enough to anchor a hat in a windstorm. Cowboys split them open and sopped up bean juice, or filled them with bacon grease. Some cooks were so protective of their starters, they slept with the crock against their body on cold nights to keep the yeast alive. Lose the starter, and you lost the one thing that made trail food bearable. Number 21. Fried salt pork. When beef was off limits because you did not eat the product you were driving to market, salt pork carried the crew. Thick slabs of pork belly, cured in heavy brine, arrived packed in wooden barrels. The cook sliced it thin, soaked the slices in water to pull some salt out, then fried them until the fat rendered and the edges crisped. The leftover grease became the foundation of everything else the cook made that day. A barrel ran about $8 and lasted weeks. The taste was aggressively salty and porky. Cowboys called it sow belly and ate it almost every morning alongside biscuits. On a cold morning in the Texas Panhandle, with frost on the grass and 1,000 longhorns stirring in the dark, that sizzle in the skillet was the sound of another day survived. Number 20. Cornmeal mush. When flour ran low, the cook turned to cornmeal. A few cups stirred into boiling water with a pinch of salt produced a thick porridge that could be eaten hot or poured into a pan to set overnight. The next morning, the cook sliced the solidified mush and fried the pieces in bacon grease until a golden crust formed on both sides, crispy on the outside, soft and warm in the middle. A 25-pound bag of cornmeal cost about $1 and traveled well in any weather. Trail cooks from the Deep South brought this tradition from home. It required nothing but water, a fire, and a heavy pan. It was the simplest meal on the trail and one of the most satisfying. First pattern break. Here is something they never tell you in the Westerns. The cook was not just some old hand who pulled the short straw. On most outfits, the cook earned more pay than the cowboys, around $45 a month, compared to $25 or $30 for the men working cattle. He woke at 3 in the morning, ground coffee, started the fire, and had breakfast ready before the first man rolled out of his bedroll. He then packed the entire wagon, drove ahead of the herd, set up again, and started cooking supper. He was also the camp barber, the dentist, the letter writer, and the closest thing to a doctor for 100 miles. If a cowboy disrespected the cook, he did not eat. Every man on that drive knew the truth. A bad cook could break an outfit faster than a stampede. Number 19. Red-eye gravy. When a cowboy wanted something to drown his biscuits in, red-eye gravy was the answer. The cook fried salt pork or ham in a skillet, then poured black coffee directly into the hot pan drippings. The mixture hissed as the coffee pulled up all those stuck-on bits of caramelized meat, creating a thin, dark gravy with a bitter edge and a deep pork flavor. No flour, no milk, just grease and coffee. The name up from the reddish sheen that floated on top when the fat and coffee separated. Cowboys poured it over biscuits, over mush, over anything that needed moisture. It cost nothing extra since the cook was already frying pork and brewing coffee. Red-eye gravy was efficiency itself, born from a culture that could not afford to waste a single drop of anything. Number 18. Son of a gun stew. This is the one with the unprintable name. When a calf was slaughtered on the trail, the cook used everything: heart, liver, tongue, sweetbreads, kidneys, and the key ingredient, a tube connecting two of the calf's stomachs called the marrow gut. Found only in unweaned calves still feeding on milk, this tube was filled with a substance resembling bone marrow that gave the stew its legendary richness. The cook diced everything, browned it in a Dutch oven, added wild onions and water, and simmered for hours. Cowboys considered it a luxury because you did not eat the cattle you were paid to deliver. But when a calf was born mid-drive and could not keep up, that was different. Old trail hands said you could judge a cook entirely by his son-of-a-gun stew. Too much liver and it turned bitter. Not enough marrow gut and it lost its soul. Number 17. Dutch oven peach cobbler. On special nights, maybe after crossing a river without losing any cattle, or after reaching a town where supplies could be restocked, the cook would break out the dried peaches. He soaked them in water until they plumped back to life, then sweetened them with brown sugar and a splash of whatever whiskey someone was willing to sacrifice. Those peaches went into a Dutch oven lined with biscuit dough, and coals were placed underneath and on the lid. 40 minutes later, the camp smelled like a bakery. The biscuit crust puffed, golden and flaky. The peaches bubbled thick and syrupy beneath it, and grown men who had spent the day choking on dust went dead silent at the first bite. Dried peaches cost about 15 cents a pound, a luxury on a trail budget, which is why cobbler was reserved for occasions. A good cook knew that morale mattered as much as calories. One cobbler could keep a crew happy for a week. Number 16. Spotted Pup. Spotted pup was the cowboy's version of rice pudding. The cook simmered rice until tender, then stirred in raisins or dried currants, brown sugar, and a splash of canned milk, if the wagon carried any. The raisins scattered through the pale rice gave the dish its name. It looked like a spotted dog. Cowboys, who spent every meal eating beans and salt pork, treated spotted pup like a reward. It was sweet, soft, and reminded them of something their mothers might have made back home in Missouri or Tennessee. Rice traveled well, and a small amount expanded dramatically when cooked, making it one of the most efficient staples on the wagon. Number 15. Bear sign. The fastest way for a trail cook to become a legend was to make bear sign. These were donuts fried in deep rendered lard over an open fire. The cook mixed flour, sugar, and sourdough starter into a soft dough, rolled it out, cut it into rings or twisted it into knots, and dropped the pieces into a Dutch oven filled with shimmering hot fat. They puffed up golden and crisp in minutes. Rolled in sugar while still warm, bear sign disappeared from the plate before the cook could finish frying the next batch. A cook who could make bear sign had his pick of outfits. Cowboys would ride extra miles and work longer shifts for a man who fried donuts on Saturday nights. The name up from frontier slang, though nobody agrees on exactly why. Some say the golden color resembled bear fat. Others say it was just cowboy humor. What nobody disputes is that bear sign was the most beloved food on the entire trail. No recipe in the chuck wagon earned more loyalty. Number 14. Skillet cornbread. Cornbread baked in a cast iron skillet over campfire coals was the other daily bread of the cattle drive. The cook mixed cornmeal with a little flour, salt, baking soda, and water or buttermilk if he had it, poured the batter into a greased skillet, and nestled it into the coals with the lid on. The bottom formed a thick, crunchy crust. The inside stayed moist and crumbly. The whole thing slid out of the skillet in one golden disc that the cook cut into wedges with a knife. Cowboys crumbled it into beans, sopped it through gravy, or ate it plain with a drizzle of sorghum syrup. Cornmeal was cheaper than wheat flour and more available across the southern plains. It also did not require a sourdough starter, making it the backup plan when the yeast culture failed. The sound of cornbread sizzling in a hot skillet meant supper was close, and on a trail drive, that was the best news a man could hear. Number 13. Vinegar pie. When the chuck wagon had no fruit, no berries, nothing sweet but sugar, and a jug of apple cider vinegar, the cook made vinegar pie. It sounds terrible, but it was anything but. Vinegar mixed with sugar, eggs, butter, and nutmeg created a filling that tasted remarkably like lemon custard. Poured into a pastry shell and baked in the Dutch oven, it emerged golden and trembling. This recipe came from Appalachian kitchens, where lemons were impossible to find. The vinegar provided the same acid bite that citrus would. Cowboys who tasted it for the first time demanded to know where the cook found lemons on the open prairie. The answer got a laugh every time. Second pattern break. The chuck wagon itself was an engineering marvel. Goodnight's design from 1866 featured a hinged tailgate that dropped down to form a work table. Shelves and drawers held every supply at arm's length. A water barrel was strapped to the side. Underneath, a rawhide sling called the possum belly carried firewood and dried buffalo chips for fuel. The entire rig carried enough food for 15 cowboys for 2 months. That pantry box held flour, beans, coffee, salt, sugar, cornmeal, dried fruit, baking powder, lard, and canned goods. A fully stocked chuck wagon cost about $75 to outfit. Modern food trucks run north of $50,000. Goodnight's design worked so well, it stayed essentially unchanged for 40 years. Number 12, pemmican. Cowboys borrowed this directly from native peoples who had been making it for centuries. Dried meat, usually buffalo or venison, was pounded into powder and mixed with rendered fat and dried berries, then pressed into dense cakes that could last for years. A single pound packed around 3,500 calories, enough to fuel a working man for an entire day. Cowboys carried it in saddlebags for emergencies, gnawing off chunks when they were too far from the wagon for a proper meal. The taste was rich, greasy, and faintly sweet from the berries. It was not something you ate for pleasure. It was something you ate because the nearest campfire was 6 hours behind you and the herd was not going to stop. Number 11, fried prairie chicken. When a cowboy got lucky with a rifle, prairie chicken was the prize. These plump birds were abundant across the Great Plains, and a good shot could bring down enough to feed half the crew. The cook plucked and cleaned them, dredged the pieces in flour with salt and pepper, and fried them in deep lard in the Dutch oven. Prairie chicken fried up golden and crispy outside, juicy and tender within. The flavor was gamier than domestic chicken, but richer, with a hint of the wild grasses the birds fed on. Fresh meat of any kind was cause for celebration. Cowboys tired of salt pork ate fried prairie chicken until their fingers were slick with grease and the bones piled high. These birds were eventually so overhunted, their numbers crashed by the early 1900s, taking this trail meal with them. Number 10, bacon and bean one-pot stew. The most common supper on the trail was the simplest. Beans simmered all day in the Dutch oven. Bacon or salt pork went in early for fat and flavor. Wild onions, a dried chili, and maybe cornmeal stirred in near the end for thickening. One pot, one fire, one meal for 15 men. The cook started this in the morning and let it simmer while the outfit moved. By evening, the beans had absorbed every drop of pork flavor and turned thick enough to stand a spoon in. Cowboys ate it from tin plates, sitting on their saddles around the fire, too tired to talk. This was the default, the fallback, the answer to every night when time was short and mouths were many. Number 9, chuck wagon chili. South Texas trail crews brought chili up the trail and it never left. The cook browned chunks of beef in lard, then stewed them with dried chili peppers, cumin, garlic, and oregano for hours. No tomatoes, no beans, just meat and peppers in a thick, fiery red sauce. Real trail chili bore no resemblance to what comes out of a can today. The vaqueros were the original cowboys, skilled horsemen who invented many of the tools and techniques American cowboys adopted, including this spiced meat stew. Trail chili could be dried into bricks and reconstituted with water weeks later, making it one of the most portable meals on the drive. Number 8. Dried apple pie. Dried apples were a chuck wagon staple because they weighed almost nothing and lasted for months. The cook soaked them overnight until they plumped, stewed them with sugar and cinnamon, then spooned the filling between layers of pastry dough in the Dutch oven. Baked over coals, that pie came out bubbling and golden, filling the camp with a smell that could stop an argument mid-sentence. A pound of dried apples cost about 12 cents in the 1870s and made 2 full pies. Cowboys sang songs about dried apple pie, not all of them complimentary. But when that pie came out of the Dutch oven, nobody was singing complaints. Number 7. Roasted marrow bones. When a steer was slaughtered, nothing went to waste. The cook cracked the leg bones with the back of an axe, set them upright in the coals, and roasted them until the marrow turned soft and buttery. Cowboys scooped out the hot marrow with a knife and spread it on biscuits or ate it straight from the bone. They were rich, almost overwhelmingly beefy, with a smooth, fatty texture that coated the tongue. Bone marrow delivered pure, concentrated calories when every man on the drive was burning thousands more than he consumed. Today, roasted marrow bones cost $15 a plate in Manhattan steakhouses. On the trail, they were the leftovers nobody else wanted. Number 6. Pan de campo. The trail bread of the vaqueros crossed into cowboy cooking and stayed. A simple flatbread made from flour, lard, salt, baking powder, and water, rolled thick and cooked in a skillet or directly on hot coals. It puffed slightly as it baked, forming a chewy bread with a charred, smoky crust. Vaquero cooks tore it into pieces to scoop beans, wrap around meat, or sop through chili. No rising time, no sourdough starter, no oven required. Pan de campo acknowledged a truth Anglo cowboys were slow to admit. Much of what made the trail kitchen work came directly from Mexican tradition. The vaqueros had been running cattle across this land for 300 years before the first American cowboy saddled a horse. Third, pattern break. Coffee on the trail was not a luxury. It was survival. Cowboys drank it at every meal and between meals. The cook brewed it brutal and black in a battered tin pot, boiling the grounds directly in the water until the liquid turned dark enough to cast a shadow. The preferred brand was Arbuckle's, pre-roasted coffee that came in 1-pound bags with a peppermint stick inside. The cowboy who volunteered to grind the beans got the peppermint. That single piece of candy was enough to start a fist fight on some outfits. Arbuckles became so universal that cowboys used the name as a synonym for coffee itself. A bag cost about 15 cents. Cowboys boiled their coffee so strong it could dissolve a horseshoe nail. Weak coffee was an insult. A cook who made weak coffee might find his bedroll moved downwind of the herd. Number 5. Sobelly and greens. When the trail crossed country where wild greens grew, a smart cook grabbed every leaf he could find. Dandelion greens, wild mustard, lamb's quarters, whatever was edible. He threw them into a skillet with thick slices of salt pork and cooked the whole thing down until the greens wilted into the rendered fat. Those greens provided vitamins the trail diet desperately lacked. Cowboys eating nothing but meat, beans, and bread for weeks developed cracked lips, bleeding gums, and bone-deep fatigue. A plate of greens in pork fat was medicine disguised as supper. Southern cooks knew this instinctively. On the trail, that knowledge saved lives. Number 4. Belly cheater. When time was short and the herd could not wait, the cook made belly cheater. It was a quick, thick gravy made from bacon grease, flour, water, and whatever meat scraps were left from the last meal. Poured over biscuits or mush, it filled the gap between real meals and kept the crew moving. The name said everything. It cheated your belly into thinking it was full when the actual substance was mostly fat and starch. Not romantic, not skillful, just the reality of feeding 15 men 3 times a day with a pantry that fit in a wooden box. Number 3, ash cake. Take cornmeal. Mix it with water and a pinch of salt. Wrap the dough in wet leaves, usually wild grape leaves or corn husks when available, and bury it directly in the hot ashes of the campfire. 20 minutes later, brush off the ash and you had bread. Crude, gritty, tasting of smoke and earth. What makes this remarkable is a chemical process called nixtamalization. When corn is cooked in an alkaline environment like wood ash, nixtamalization occurs. The ash breaks down the outer hull of the corn and releases niacin, a B vitamin the human body cannot extract from untreated cornmeal. Without this process, people who relied heavily on corn developed pellagra, a devastating deficiency disease. Native peoples understood this chemistry thousands of years before European scientists identified it. Cowboys who cooked ash cake were unknowingly tapping into ancient nutritional science. The wood ash was not just a cooking surface, it was an ingredient. Number 2, sourdough flapjacks. If biscuits were the daily bread, flapjacks were the Saturday morning reward. The cook thinned his sourdough starter with water, added sugar and baking soda, and poured the batter onto a greased griddle over the coals. They cooked quickly, bubbling on one side, then flipped to brown on the other. Stacked 4 high on a tin plate and drizzled with sorghum syrup, they were the closest thing to home cooking a cowboy tasted for months. The sourdough gave them a tangy depth regular pancakes could not match. Every cook had his own batter thickness and his own flip technique. Arguments about flapjacks lasted longer than arguments about religion. A stack at dawn, with black coffee and the sound of the herd moving slowly in the distance, was as close to peace as the trail ever offered. Number 1, campfire steak seared in the coals. When a steer broke a leg or a calf could not keep up, the cook got fresh beef. And when a trail cook had fresh beef, he did the one thing no modern kitchen can replicate. He threw the steak directly into the fire, not onto a grill, not into a pan, but into the coals. A thick-cut steak laid flat on glowing red mesquite coals seared instantly. The outside charred to a black crust in under a minute, sealing the juices inside. The cook pulled it out, knocked off the ash, and served it almost raw in the center. The Maillard reaction, the chemical process that creates deep, complex beef flavor, happens faster and more intensely at the extreme temperatures of direct ember cooking. Modern chefs have rediscovered this technique and charge $50 a plate. Trail cooks did it because they did not have a clean pan. Cowboys gathered around the fire in silence for a meal like this. No jokes, no complaints, just knives on tin plates and the occasional grunt of satisfaction. That was the finest meal the trail ever produced, and we forgot it completely. Try one of these, ash cake, the sourdough flapjacks. Throw a steak in the coals next time you are sitting around a campfire and watch the faces. Share which one you are going to try in the comments. If your grandfather ever cooked on a cattle ranch, I want to hear what he made. Because these meals are not just history, they are proof that the best cooking has never needed anything more than fire, hunger, and the will to make something out of nothing.